So good morning and a very warm welcome to everybody. We will be starting our webinar in just a couple of moments. We'll just give everybody a few more minutes to join. But on the behalf of all of our sponsors, Small Arms Survey, Costa Rica, the Permanent Mission of Austria, UNIDIR, UN SaferGuard and AMAT, we'd like to say we're very happy that you've chosen to join this side event. We will just be beginning in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I think we're all here. Great. Okay, so hello and welcome again to everybody. My name is Callum Watson. I'm the gender coordinator at the Small Arms Survey, and it's a real privilege to be with you today at this side event, which is being held alongside the open-ended working group on conventional ammunition. So today you're going to have the privilege of speaking to four female experts in ammunition management. This is a topic that we consider to be very important, given that the current draft global framework does talk about the importance of women's meaningful participation in all aspects of ammunition management. I'd also like to acknowledge that this side event is being co-sponsored by a whole host of different sponsors. So we're very grateful that Costa Rica, the Permanent Mission of Austria, UNIDIR, UN SaferGuard, and AMAT have decided to co-sponsor us. On behalf of the Small Arms Survey, I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the German Federal Foreign Office and Switzerland for our work on gender-responsive small arms control. But without further ado, it's my privilege to hand over to Ambassador Maritza Chan Valverde. She is the permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations and the Vice Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Conventional Ammunition. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Callum. It's an honor to be with you today. Happy Valentine's today. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, participants, and friends, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to today's side event on women's meaningful participation in ammunition management. This event takes place at the margins of the third substantive session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Conventional Ammunition, where my colleagues and I are discussing a new global framework for through-life conventional ammunition management. So why are we here today? We know that according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that every has the right to equal access to public service in the country. We know that in 2010, 13 years ago, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 65/69 on women, disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control, which invited all member states to support and strengthen the effective participation of women in organizations in the field of disarmament at the local, national, region, and sub-regional levels. We know that in 2019, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 74/65 on problems arising from the accumulation of unconventional ammunition stockpiles in surplus, which recognized the need to encourage the full involvement of both women and men in ammunition management practice and policy. We also know that the group of governmental experts on problems arising from the accumulation of conventional ammunition stockpiles, whose work led to the creation of this working group, achieved gender balance and reiterated the importance of women participations in order to achieve the objectives set out in the Arms Trade Treaty and the UN Agenda for Disarmament. And yet, We still find that women's expertise is often missing from discussion on ammunition management, which remains a very male-dominated field. We still find that some member states send all male delegations to this and other relevant fora. We still find that in our discussions on arms control, some states resist references on gender and relevant complementarity frameworks, such as the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. This is why in the first meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group in May last year, Costa Rica called for a sincere discussion on how women and girls can be included in disarmament and arms control processes that transcend superficial quotas, placeholders, or victimization tropes. This follows on the footsteps of our engagement within the framework of the Program of Action Small Arms Allied Weapons, where last year we made a joint statement on behalf of 56 states and the EU on the need to retain progressive language addressing the connection between gender and small arms. And thanks to that statement, we protected and advanced the recognition of gender as a crucial element in small arms and ammunition management. And as the first ever woman permanent representative of Costa Rica to the UN, the fight for women's full, equal, meaningful, and effective participation is one that I'm personally very familiar with. But this fight is not over. I would therefore like to invite you all in the audience, including my fellow delegates at the Open-Ended Working Group, to join me in welcoming our 4 distinguished women experts in ammunition. We're here to hear you, to learn from you, and then to act. Thank you very much. And let's hear from these brilliant women who are here to share their expertise and encourage us to raise the level of ambition here at the United Nations. I know we can do it, and we will do it. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that very inspiring speech as an opening remark there. I now have the pleasure to pass the floor to Nora Agayer from the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs. Nora has been critical in the establishment of the Women Ammunition Management Network, and Women Ammunition Expert Network, of which we've drawn 4 members to speak to today. So it's my pleasure now to hand the floor over to Nora.
Thank you very much, Callum, for the kind introduction, and big thanks to Small Arms Survey for organizing this side event. I think hearing from women who are actually working in technical ammunition management roles is immensely important so that we can better understand the barriers that are faced by women, and most importantly, what can be done to address them. And of course, as Ambassador Chan has already highlighted, this comes at a crucial moment as member states are elaborating a new global framework on conventional ammunition management, and within that discuss gender mainstreaming of ammunition management policy and practice, and advancing gender equality in this field. Now, I wanted to provide a bit of background on the work undertaken on gender under the UN SaferGuard program, which is the UN's knowledge management platform on conventional ammunition management. Over the past years, we have been implementing a project on gender and ammunition management, looking at both the gendered impacts of inadequate ammunition management and the importance of equal, full, effective, and meaningful participation in all stages of the ammunition management life cycle. We are very grateful that this work has been supported by a number of states, including Austria, Germany, Ireland, France, and Switzerland. And as part of this project, as Callum has mentioned, there was a professional network of women ammunition management experts that has been established, and which currently comprises 13 women from 9 countries across all regions. And we hope that this is just the beginning. This initiative importantly responds to some of the recommendations of a study which was published by UNIDIR on women in WAM a few years ago, and which recommended the establishment of such a network to make women more visible in technical roles at the international level, and to provide them with some degree of support in advancing their career. And I want to highlight that this is really a collaborative effort by various organizations working in the area of ammunition management. And as you can see, as a sponsorship of this side event. And we as different organizations want to support this network to provide a space for mentoring, capacity building, and empowerment. And so to build this network, ODA in partnership with the Ammunition Management Advisory Team, Small Arms Survey, and UNIDIR held a workshop in Geneva in November last year, where the network members were able to meet to discuss substantive matters related to ammunition management, as well as gender equality, while also strengthening skills in advocacy, in communication, and in training delivery. And we also have some concrete plans in the future for this network, including we want to consolidate the network further by supporting members to grow their skills, competence, and visibility, by inviting them to meetings, to events, and involving them in technical discussions around the IATG. And we also want to further grow the network, including through additional workshops, as well as dedicated training courses for women working in technical roles in ammunition management on the International Ammunition Technical Guidelines, which we are currently planning in collaboration with Austria and AMAT. And as you will see today, we have initiated this network with a diverse and knowledgeable group of experts, some of whom are with us today. And before closing, I wanted to thank the 4 members of the network for joining us and for sharing their experience. During the workshop in Geneva last year, we heard many firsts. The first woman explosive ordnance disposal technician in her country. The first woman as an ammunition technical officer deployed in a peacekeeping mission. The first woman instructor on ammunition management in her armed forces. So hopefully soon there will be no more such firsts, as women will have equal access and opportunities to ammunition management professions, making the sector more effective, more sustainable, and further advancing diversity in this field. So thanks again for being with us today, and we look forward to the insights shared today. Back to you, Kamala. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nora, and it's a real privilege to be working with UNODA, AMAT, and UN SaferGuard on this network. So without further ado, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll set off the discussion with some guiding questions. So I think the first person that's going to introduce herself will be Preeti. Preeti, would you just like to introduce yourself to the group?
A very warm hello to everyone. I hope I'm audible, Callum. Great. A very warm hello to everyone. I am Preeti Kanwar. I am a Lieutenant Colonel in the Indian Army, and I have been an officer for 18 years and an ATO for 10 years. I am presently deployed at a training institute, and as an instructor, it's part of my job to groom the next generation of ATOs in the Indian Army.
Thank you very much. And then our next distinguished panelist will be Lina.
Hello to everyone. My name is Lina Castillo. I'm the head of projects unit for UNMAS Colombia. UNMAS is the United Nations Mine Action Service, and I'm in charge of making sure that UNMAS projects are implemented correctly and that all ops and quality management aspects are technically correct.
Thank you very much, Lina. Our next panelist will be Sheena.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheena Saint-Mark, and I'm a police officer. I have been a police officer for 10 years within the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. I work alongside the armorer as the armor assistant, and part of my duties entails ammunition and arms management.
Thank you very much, Sheena. And last but not least, we have Sherry. I think you're on mute, Sherry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Oak. I have a bachelor's of engineering from military college, and then I did a master's in explosive ordnance engineering from Srivenham in 1995. And I've been working in the field of ammunition management for doing certification of ammunition pretty much since then. So it's been like a 35-year career working in this field. I've been working with both operations and deployed, domestic, and on the logistics side of trying to make sure that we have enough and doing forecasting.
Thank you very much, Sherry. So I hope everybody can see that we have both a very geographically diverse group here. We've got representatives from Canada, St. Lucia, India, and Colombia, but also a wide range of levels of expertise. We've got people who've been in this game for a long time, and we've got other people who are going to be the next generation of ammunition technical experts. So let's turn to the discussion of the days, which what we're going to do is look at what some of the barriers to women's meaningful participation in ammunition management are. The reason why we thought we'd talk about this is because there are some references already in the global framework that we're discussing within the discussions of the open-ended working group, but we thought it might be interesting for delegates and other people who are interested to really hear what this language actually means in practice. So we talk a lot about barriers, we talk a lot about obstacles, we talk about good practices, and we thought we'd put some human faces behind those words so that everybody really understands what some of the major challenges are, noting that sometimes there's a bit of stereotyping as to the challenges people assume that women might face. So first of all, I'm going to pass the floor to Preeti, and we'd be very curious to hear from you, Preeti, about what challenges you think women in India and other contexts you're aware of have faced in this field of ammunition management, and whether you have some good practices and suggestions to the group as to how these challenges have been overcome.
Thank you, Callum. Well, firstly, I'd like to tell my audience that in the Indian Defense Forces, and specifically in the Indian Army, the women have been around for almost 2 decades now. And while the intake initially was not very many in numbers, but over these 2 decades, we have made substantial progress in terms of adding women to all kinds of roles. And I'm from the first batch of ATOs which were trained. And I and my colleagues were given this opportunity to train as ATOs by the Indian Army because a policy framework was put in place. So for the first decade, I'd say one of the barriers was that there weren't enough women in uniform to actually come forward for this training. And there was no policy framework in place to open these roles to women. So that was, but it was an unintended barrier because whenever you have a change in an organization, it kind of takes time to settle and grow. So over a decade, while the women in the army, in the uniformed roles, matured with their responsibilities, and the organization realized that they should open up more fields for the women, including the technical ones, for them to function more effectively and contribute to the organization and to grow professionally as well. So the first barrier, not enough women. And once there were substantial numbers, then the second barrier was probably that the training did not exist initially. So although the men were being trained as ATOs, the courses were not yet mandatory or open to women. So that was the second step which the organization took in including women for training them as ammunition technical officers. The next barrier, I would say, once all of us got trained, would have been to deploy us actually on ground to perform our duties as ATOs. So unintended barriers, it was just that the change had to come in from within the organization and also from the women volunteering to actually carry out these duties. So gradual change, and I'm happy to tell that with the combined efforts of the organization, putting in the policies in place, putting in the training in place, and also of more and more women volunteering to actually want to do these roles, we now have all the women who get commissioned into the Corps of Ordnance actually going in for the training as ATOs, and then they can be deployed as ATO roles. So yes, the barriers initially were there, but then gradually they have been overcome. And another point I would like to tell is that quite a large part of this change has also been cultural, because initially women in defense roles is not something which was very common. And I think it's true world over, because they are traditionally seen as caregivers and, homemakers, and not in roles which are associated with dangerous jobs. And yes, handling ammunition is dangerous. But then times change, opportunities open up, and then the barriers get overcome. Yeah, back to you, Callum.
Thanks a lot, Preeti. And I think that's a really useful intervention, because I think sometimes we focus excessively on policies, but we have to also recognize that women's agency is very important. And I think that's definitely something that we've seen as a theme in the network of women's ammunition experts. The other thing I find interesting is that you've highlighted the importance of both a policy and a cultural change. And I think certainly from my previous work looking at women's roles in peace operations, we saw many efforts to change policies, but not necessarily always efforts to change culture. And definitely if we don't have these two together, then it's very unlikely that we're going to see a change in the sense of having more women meaningfully participating in ammunition management. So that was a very interesting perspective from Preeti working in the military. And now I'd like to bring in Lena. So Lena's from a civilian background. So did you face similar challenges as a civilian trying to come into this area, or were there some differences? And what do you think helped you to thrive in this area? How was it that you were able to overcome some of the barriers you faced to working in ammunition management? So Lena.
Thank you, Callum. Yeah, I think that as Preeti mentioned, the access to training and cultural changes and then policies are very important. But then you also have to take into account that sometimes you have several biases getting together. And in my case, I was not just a young woman getting into the sector, but I was also civilian in a very male and military dominated field. So it was very hard sometimes to make yourself be heard and to be taken into account, because I was simply not a man, and also not, I didn't have the military background. So I was not trained in ammunition management or explosive ordnance, even though I had other qualifications as an engineer. So it was very hard. And as I have mentioned several times, and I shared in our meetings, there was a moment where I had to represent my country in a meeting with some people from the armed forces, and they decided that they were not going to meet me because I was simply not in their level, I guess. And what I found was that it was very important to have male sponsors and male people backing you up and behind you and saying, well, if they're not meeting you, then they're not meeting anyone, because you're the expert, you're the one that is there, and you're the one who's going to solve you. So to solve this, so if they are not meeting you, then they're not meeting anyone, and this issue is going to stay like this. And having these sponsors and these coaches and these male roles behind your back, and really making sure that it's not just the policy that is in place, but that the policy is respected, and that you as an individual is respected with all the capacities and what you bring to the table. That is very important. And the other thing is, once I had the access to training, because even though I could understand what we were talking about because of my engineering background, and because I knew about materials and chemicals and stuff, it was still not enough, because I was not an explosive ordnance disposal technician, or I was not an ammunition technician. And those trainings are just open only for armed forces, at least in Colombia, and normally just for men, as Preeti mentioned previously. So once I had the access to those trainings, I gained the confidence and the confidence and also the space, because as I made those trainings with other male colleagues, during those trainings, they understood that I was as capable as they were, and that we were not just able to get dirty and carry things. We actually enjoyed getting dirty and carrying things, and we were able to do the same job, and that we had a lot of positive and added values to bring to the table. And I think that that's very, very important. So it's not just having the policy, but making sure that you have someone behind reinforcing and making sure it happens.
Thank you very much for that, Lina. And I think once again, we've highlighted the importance of leadership. So when we talk about leadership, that also applies to gender equality. I think that's one of the reasons why in the working paper that was developed with Costa Rica, Trinidad and Tobago on the Small Arms Survey, we really highlighted the importance of security sector governance. So when you have these policies in place, it's important also that leaders understand that part of their role is to ensure they create a work environment where everybody is able to thrive irrespective of their gender, you know. So it's not just a case of having words on a paper and having the fact that women are theoretically able to take on these positions, but they're not getting any support from higher up. So I'm really pleased that you raised that topic as well. So that actually leads us in a quite nice segue towards Sheena, because Sheena's got experience then working from the perspective of police. And I know that you know, it'd be interesting to hear from you about your experiences of training opportunities, particularly. Was this something that was given to you, or is this something that you've struggled to find? And what kind of other barriers have you faced in your context in the Caribbean when it comes to engaging in ammunition management?
Well, St. Lucia in general, there has been a lack of opportunities for training. And this has been the number one barrier, is the lack of opportunities for women in the technical field, that is. And I believe that the organization, they're not fully aware of the interests of their members. And the reason for that is that employees are not fully engaged on that level. We go to work daily, we carry out our duties, and we do this routinely. There is the interest in employees' career advancement is not at the level that it should be. And I believe also that the training to make it available to us, there has been a struggle for that. So also, because this is a male-dominant field, people are of the notion that women are not competent enough in this field. My organization has been in existence since 1834, and I am the first female to actually get the opportunity to work in the armory. Since then, since the organization was brought into existence. And how this happened for me is that initially I showed interest in my department. I went to my commander and I said to him, I want to work in the armory. And he said, no. Initially he said no, but my supervisor now, my now supervisor, he went to my commander and he said, I want this girl to work with me. So I really had an ally, and that helped the move for me from general policing to the armory, where I work and do ammunition and arms management. The biases, there is an unconscious bias against women in this field, and it's a challenge, really. And because of that, sometimes we are unsure of ourselves. We lack the confidence. I struggled with confidence, and it's all because of the lack of training. However, because I've shown an active interest in the field and I've maintained that interest, and I have really maintained my determination, I get certain opportunities. So I am not an expert. However, I am well on the way with this network. I believe that I am well on the way on becoming an expert.
Thanks a lot, Sheena. And certainly something that we looked at when we were looking at why there aren't more women working in peacekeeping roles. In a previous project I was working on, looked at how training opportunities were disseminated. So was it just the case of the leader of the organization tapping on the shoulder of someone they thought was a protege or they thought would advance, or was this an opportunity that was shared with everybody? And once again, you know, there's this challenge with even if opportunities are presented to people, do women realistically think that they'll be accepted and supported if they take on these training opportunities? So I was really glad that you raised that point.
Yes. Actually, because there has been a lack of opportunities, and when the opportunity do present itself, really the males are the ones benefiting from it, and women do not put themselves forward because, again, it's a male. It's at the notion that it is a male-dominant field.
Excellent. So there's still kind of work to be done there to change attitudes, to address stereotypes. And I think one of the mistakes that perhaps we make when we look at women's meaningful participation is to focus our efforts only on women. But there's a whole side that the institution needs to take into account when it comes to gender stereotypes and the attitudes of leaders. I'm going to bring in Sherry now, because I know that Sherry's had many years of experience. So I don't know whether this is a new problem, Sherry, or if there's other things that you've noticed that have become barriers to women's meaningful participation that we've developed good practices in overcoming.
I'm going to go back with a bit of perspective. So in Canada, when certain fields were opened up to women, from a policy perspective, yes, politically, top down, they may have been opened, but we still had to deal with colleagues who perhaps thought that those occupations should not have been opened. And that's a cultural change that we have to deal with. And many women push through that regardless of what their colleagues were saying. And I believe that sort of the lifespan of I'll call it, quote, a generation is about actually 4 years inside of an organization as people move around. So you have to wait about 4 years for a new generation to come in before they think that what they see now has always been that way. People do forget. The bit of what I call organizational amnesia. Where I'm going with this is that for a long time, women were not permitted to go on certain career courses at Canadian Forces College, because to do that, you had to have been an officer commanding of a company or something before, and the women were not allowed to have the prerequisites to even get there. But once the categories were open that they could go into, suddenly the question was, well, you've always been, the expectation was, well, of course you were able to do this and you just didn't choose to. So they had forgotten that these courses had been blocked, and the women then were blamed for not being competitive to get on those courses. So from a training systems perspective, the solution to this was to add specific slots to make up for that just for the women alone, or we could apply it to any other ethnicity or other group that may have been disadvantaged, in order to make up for that disengagement that had been done systemically beforehand. So the point is that initiatives can be taken to open up courses and training, even if you have to add a few more seats. And here we are, 25 years after that, nobody even remembers that had to be done, because the women are competitive now in their careers and courses. And I do want to mention that, why are we doing all of this? And I do believe strongly in personal agency. Many years ago, people would ask, well, why are you interested in doing this field? It's very technical and very difficult. And the answer is, well, it seemed like a calling. I was drawn to it. I actually didn't find engineering at all to be gendered. The equations certainly don't have a gender to them. The way things break and fall apart does not have a gender. So on the mechanism, I actually found it very neutral and free of any societal constraints. Now, I am just going to, for a bit of perspective as well, talk about the importance of having those policies coming from top down to support people with what they want to achieve in their goals and careers. So I mentioned I was at Shrivenham in 1995. And the reason I was mentioning that was I became pregnant with my second child while I was there. And the nurse at the station was telling me to shush about my pregnancy result, because at that point in time, women in the British forces were expected to be kicked out if they were pregnant. They were not allowed to be pregnant and still in the military at that time. Now, as you see today, I think all of us here are mothers, and all of us also, I think, have supportive husbands, partners who allow us and appreciate our independence and our drive that we each have ourselves to achieve our own personal agency.
Thank you very much for that, Sherry. No, I think, yeah, we'll talk about the importance of parental leave in a second. I think that's something I'd like to get everybody's opinions on as well. So it's really fascinating, but I think another thing to recognize is the fact that what is the assumed knowledge we have of people coming into a particular field? So do we assume that they already know about something from a different field? And I find it quite interesting that there's, even in the field of engineering, there's sometimes an assumption that people coming into that course will have experience, perhaps tinkering with cars and equipment in childhood. But yet, on the other hand, there's no assumed knowledge that men in the military know how to use an iron, right? So we spend a lot of time training them in that kind of area. So just to have a bit of equality, you know, in terms of getting everybody up to the same level before we offer training, I think is something that I see often comes up in these particular spaces. I'm going to hand the floor back to Preeti. So I don't know if you've got anything to add, Preeti, on the importance of leadership. That was something that Sherry was also raising, and maybe that question of how institutions can support women and also men who have caregiving roles.
Well, I would like to weigh in on the aspect of whenever you open a field for women, initially the mentorship just circles around the men in the field because they are the ones who are there in the senior roles. But if you support the women, and if there are adequate number of volunteers and there are women willing to take on the roles, they eventually rise to the levels of becoming leaders and mentors themselves. Now, this is something, like Sherry mentioned, it has to be top down, because it is not enough for the women to stand up and say, hey, I want to do this, or that I'll be able to do these roles. There has to be a policy framework in place which allows women to rise to those roles, which allow women to be selected based on their competence for these leadership roles. And once they are selected for these leadership roles, then they can build a network and they can be mentors for the other junior women who are, you know, wanting to do these roles. So leadership is very important. And as far as India is concerned, I'm extremely happy to share with the audience that this year, the Indian Army has put women in the roles of commanding officers. And 108 women this very year have been selected for the appointment, for the select appointments of full colonels. This is something which has happened for the first time. And this is because of there being a policy decision which has been taken by the organization that yes, women have been around for this amount of time and they have been performing their duties. And yes, they are capable, they are equipped, they are trained enough to lead. So they have been given commanding officers roles. Now they will be handling all kinds of echelons in all the roles that are open to them. So I think that these women will now be the leaders and mentors for the junior women coming in. So policy, very, very important. And like Sherry said, it has to be top down. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Preeti. So of course, it's important to have a situation where we don't just see, you know, a token number of women coming in at the bottom of the institution, but really to be recognized fully as equals, we need to see them at all levels, including in leadership roles. Of course, one of the challenges that women sometimes face is if there are discriminatory or unsupportive policies related to family, and knowing that all of you do have children, then we're not going to get women into those higher roles. So I'd be kind of curious now to hear a bit from Lena on this topic, because I know that you've also raised a family in this situation. So what was it that really helped you enable to continue your career while also being a parent in this role? And would you have any other recommendations and good practices for the group if we want to ensure that women can make a career of ammunition management and it's not just something they do before they have children and that they have to give up when they reach a certain age?
Well, thank you, Callum. And I think this is very important. And I think this is actually one of the main reasons that women, because this is one of the main reasons to have less women participating in this kind of roles. And it's because we fear that we need to be a part of our families, or that we cannot do both things at the same time. And something that has helped me a lot is, first of all, I had the time to be with my baby when she was born. I had a 9-month baby. I decided to become a mother, and we decided to start like to have kids later. And I was focused on my career for many, many years. And me and my husband, we decided to have a kid later on. And that allowed me also to be in a position where I was able to have a maternity leave, and also came back later to the organization and still have my job, my position. And I was supported by the team here in Colombia during my maternity leave. And they were, I mean, thank you guys, you were awesome. And, but also my husband had the opportunity to take time and stay at home with the baby. And he's been very hands-on. And I think it's not just to give the maternity leave for women, it has to do also with giving men the opportunity to take care, and if they want and if they can, stay at home with their families. So in the end, this field with ammunition and explosive ordnance can happen in non-conflict areas, but also happens in many places that are non-family duty stations. And you can decide if you go to non-family duty stations or not. But it has to be a choice for women or for men. And what we have seen, or what I have seen, is that normally men can make that decision easily, or easier than we, and that's my experience. So I think it's very, very important to give the space to women to take their maternity leaves and to take care of their families, but it's also important to open the policy and give the time and space for men to take care of their families, so we can share and balance those roles at home too. Because if we just want to balance in the workspace, then you won't find the balance at home. And again, it's going to be very hard.
Thank you very much, Lena. And that would seem to feed back into the conversations we've talked about when it comes to gender stereotypes. So we've talked about, many of you have talked about the fact that you work in a field that is not historically or stereotypically seen as an appropriate field for women. And similarly, the role of caregiving historically hasn't been seen as an appropriate field for men. So we need to challenge these stereotypes, both when it comes to women and for men, if we're going to have equality and we're going to have a situation where people work in fields that they're interested in and that they're qualified for. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I know that Lena began to talk about differences between conflict and non-conflict areas, and we have a question about weapon and ammunition management in post-conflict reconstruction. And so I know Sherry's got a few points she'd like to make, and I'll pass the floor to her.
I'll address some of the stuff in the questions as well. I just want to go back to what Lena was saying. Just as a reminder, here in Canada, we had maternity leave allowed for women in the military for a very long time. But for some reason, the supervisors would be very anxious, oh, you got to go on maternity leave. Well, funny enough, about the year 2000, we started parental leave for the men. And it was very funny how fast the opinion switched over, oh, it is leave, you're entitled to it, go take it. and we expect you to take it and then come back later in a few months. So I just want to note that from a policy perspective, it was very interesting on the maternity or the parental care aspect, how once it was opened up to men as well, that the institutional reasons over why it was difficult to administer suddenly dissipated and disappeared. Now, I just want to focus back on the questions about post-conflict issues regarding the participation of women in post-conflict reconstruction. My experience comes from being deployed several times to some mission areas, and I would say that it's actually absolutely imperative for women in those affected areas to be involved in the post-conflict reconstruction. And the reason is why is back to the personal agency. And because we can talk about part of that agency also includes financial security and the ability to make decisions for themselves and to bind the community together as a whole in the development of whatever this post-conflict reconstruction, whatever this post-conflict society is going to be like. The conflict, if you think of it as a dislocation, actually creates an opportunity to generate new patterns of life, of economic viability. We've seen how there will always be agents acting to fill in the power vacuum. And if women can fill some of it through their active participation, whether it is in demining, whether it is doing control, whether it is doing patrolling on their own in their own communities, you are going to get, I believe, a much stronger fabric of society back out of it because they are actively engaged, but also they're not being seen as the passive receptors of the efforts that are being applied to from on top, whether it's with good intentions, yes, from the international community, like we always try to do. For example, I'm aware that over in Libya, there was efforts made so that women will be actively engaged in doing the demining and demilitarization over there, and that's had a very, very good effect. India, for example, has also sent over an entire battalion of women over to South Sudan, I believe, to assist in preventative measures of the conflict of what's being seen there. So it's a very big topic, but I would like to say that I believe the active engagement of women is necessary. From the international community as well, there's what we call the Gen Ads, the gender advisors in different militaries, different organizations, which is helpful for doing the hard work of assessment with disaggregated data. And I would recommend, there's several courses on that, including the Nordic Center for Gender in Military Operations. And they're accepting students from around the world. So this is part of an overall effort, and I believe that what we call the gender mainlining or mainstreaming, the tools are there. We need to work to apply them because I believe that no society will be stable until and unless the other half of it, the women, are able to be actively engaged and are actively supporting it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Sherry. And I think often there's a perception that gender is a kind of nice to have, something that we can do if we have time. But really, whether or not you think you're doing work on gender, you are affecting gender equality and gender roles in the environment in which you're working. So that's something that's important to raise. I know that many people, many of the delegations in the open-ended working group yesterday were highlighting the fact that it wasn't just a matter of principle that they supported gender mainstreaming in the field of ammunition management, but it was also about effectiveness. So thanks for explaining that so succinctly. I'm going to pass the floor now to Sheena, who's also had her experience of parental leave in the armourer, the police. What would you like to add, Sheena? And I think you're on mute.
Yes, Kelam. Actually, prior to my pregnancy, I requested to go to the armory and I was refused. And after my pregnancy, I believe that aided the shift because of the time that we work in the armory is 8 to 4, and general duties would have been 12 hours, 24 hours. And it was more accommodating to me as a new parent, and that really assisted my shift to the armory as well. So I wanted to add this.
Yeah, so sometimes the flexible working hours, I think, can be really critical in these particular environments, and they're not always something that's that complicated to implement. So I think that's a really important point that you've raised. Okay, so noting that here we're also with an audience that might be interested in what kinds of things they could undertake as the international community to promote the full, equal, a meaningful and effective participation of women in ammunition management, especially in technical roles. There'll be people in this audience who are interested in what kinds of actions can be undertaken within the framework of international cooperation and assistance. So what I'd like to do now is to ask each of our panelists what recommendations they would like to make based on their experience with this network, based on their personal experiences beforehand in their institutions and internationally. What would they like to recommend in terms of things that the international community can do to increase women's meaningful participation in this field? And we'll go in the same order, I think, that we did last time. So I'll first hand the floor to Preeti. What would you like to share with our international community participants?
Well, Callum, the biggest thing I realized is that one has to be given opportunities, because it is not enough to step up and volunteer. It's not enough to be trained. Unless there are opportunities for you to step up to for these type of technical roles, you are not going to get anywhere. And these opportunities can only be put in place if, first and foremost, you have a policy framework in place. Because whatever changes you want the organization to do, it has to be top driven. So you put a policy in place which gives fair, unbiased opportunities to the women to be able to apply for these roles, to be able to apply for these trainings. Then in the next step, you give them the opportunities to apply their training in the roles. Like, for example, I would like to just add in here, after Sheena's example, after my pregnancy and my first child, I resumed duties at my station, and it was in the role of an ATO. And I actually wanted to go for a particular demolition on ground. And because my child was 18 months old, some of my seniors were hesitant that how will you kind of handle this, or do you really want to go and it is dangerous and you have a kid? And my husband was not stationed with me at that point of time. But I volunteered because I asked, if you don't give me the opportunity, what use is my training if I'm not given the opportunity to perform the duties of an ATO? And that experience of that particular event really helped me grow as an ATO. It helped me develop the confidence that yes, what I have learned, what I have trained for, I'm able to do it. And thereafter, I was able to take more technical roles and more responsibilities as an ATO. So opportunity and the policy framework to give those opportunities. And once women have come in those particular roles, then you have to put in a policy for family, like maternity we spoke about, so that once you take a break for maternity, you are thereafter able to come back into the system and resume and grow professionally and grow into a leadership role. So that is the final word that I would like to give, that just give fair, unbiased opportunities. There are women willing to step up. They will step up. You just have to give them a chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Preeti. That's very inspiring. I just want to acknowledge actually in the Q&A that we've talked about opportunities for women, but we also do recognize there's all kinds of intersectional factors. So we also need to think about which women and which men are able to apply. Are they from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, religions, different wealth levels, different levels of education? So that's something to consider. But what I really liked about Preeti's intervention there was we're talking a lot about the through life management of ammunition in this open-ended framework, open-ended working group, but there's also a through life life perspective that needs to happen when we're thinking about people's careers. So we don't want to do piecemeal activities where we just offer training and we don't think about what happens next. We've trained these people. Do they have opportunities? Okay, we've got people with opportunities. Will we retain them in the institution? So having that through life perspective also to our international cooperation and assistance seems to be key based on what you were saying. I'm going to pass the floor now to Lena.
Thank you, Callum. And adding to what Preeti just said, last year I led an EOD training and I was 6 months pregnant. And obviously I did not went to the demolition sites and I did not do those things because that was going to be harmful for the baby. But I still was leading the training. I was working with the Army for a training of 25 civilians and 7 women within that group. So I think that even with the considerations of maternity and the things that we as women have to biologically to bring to, we still can do our jobs. But I think the solution is not just one thing. It's not just going to be policy or opportunities, as Preeti mentioned. This has to be a comprehensive approach. And this means, obviously, we have to make women in this field being visible, because when for the cultural change, we need others to see that we actually can do the job and that we do it well. We need to open trainings and give the technical capacities to women if we want them to have a meaningful participation. And we also need coaches and sponsors and people, not just men, as was mentioned, men and women pushing for the women meaningful participation. So I think it cannot be a simple answer. It has to be a comprehensive effort, and it has to go in every level. But I'm sure that once you're in the field and once you're working shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues and your partners, the gender bias is forgotten, and you can work and you work with your teams, and everyone respects the capabilities in the person and not the color of the skin or the gender or whatever other diversity characteristics or features you may see. When you're doing the real work, the important thing is to make things right and to work in a team effort, no matter who's your team members.
Thank you very much for that, Lena. And that's something that I really like about the way this network was set up, because it does provide an opportunity, like we've taken today, to demonstrate, to provide visibility to women who are already working in the area, to challenge those stereotypes. And I think I liked how I think you suggested that people begin to see you then as a colleague and not as a woman, right? And so it's important that people can also then reach out to mentors or other people who are inspiring to them. So that visibility piece is really important. And I think that is something that other members of the international community could do through their international cooperation efforts. I'm going to pass the floor now to Sheena. So what recommendations would you like to make to the international community on how they can contribute to increasing women's meaningful participation in ammunition management?
Yes, Kelam. I'm calling on to the international communities to assist the small islands like St. Lucia by providing training opportunities and making these things available to us. And when they do make it available, that they make it mandatory that the organizations do send out women, not just women representation, but have women participation. Also, I want to share an experience I had. And it just comes down to the barriers that we women face in these fields. And because again, there's I believe it's the unconscious bias that there are against women, that women are not strong enough. The men have all the strength and women cannot carry boxes of ammunition. I believe that we need to target our cultural aspect when it comes to in my society. And the experience that I want to share is that sometime in December, we had a situation of mold, and we cleaned up the place, had the place sprayed down, and we were stockpiling the ammunition. So I sourced a backhoe hand trolley to aid me in carrying more boxes, because I could not carry physically, I would carry one box physically. So I sourced a hand backhoe to assist me in carrying more boxes. And on that hand trolley, I would have carried 5 boxes of ammunition. But my male colleague, I believe he was not ill-intentioned. He believed that he could have carried 6 boxes and it would have expedited the process of stockpiling. And he came and he said, I'm going to take the trolley because I will carry 6 boxes. And I'm like, no, I'm carrying 5. What's the big deal? So I really think that the international bodies should assist the small islands, and in doing so, when involving women and men, to also have men understand that women too can be strong, women too, given the opportunity, given the training, that we can do exactly what men can do.
Thank you very much for that, Sheena. And so recognize that St. Lucia is, is a small island state, so it won't always be the case that all of the opportunities will be available to you in your particular country. But we already know that there's frequent collaboration across the Caribbean and also with other member states. So the fact that some member states, such as India, have larger facilities means that they have an important role that they can provide to women working in other areas. But absolutely, I think once again, you've highlighted the importance of addressing both structural factors like training, but also that kind of cultural element. And I like the example you provided there. It's what we might sometimes call benevolent sexism in the gender field, where men think that they're being chivalrous by giving women easier tasks, but they're actually hindering their career advancement. And this often is coupled with other forms of sexual harassment that are associated with gender inequality. Just noting in the chat here that, of course, it's very important that we talk about policies for zero tolerance of sexual harassment, and we also hold leaders accountable if they behave in a sexist way that is not in line with national gender legislation. So thanks for providing that input. Last but not least, I'm going to give the floor to Sherry for some final recommendations.
I think organizations like this, or efforts that is being made right now, is part of the solution set. I touched earlier about the importance of policies from a top-down perspective. They're enablers. They're enablers for the women to not be lost at, I'll call it, the first challenge of pregnancy, maternity. They're enablers for when you get in the door to continue when they want to reach that life of having their families. The ammunition community, people may not be aware, but it's actually very, very stovepiped. It's usually nationally driven. I would not have met my colleagues here had it not been for the effort of Anoda and Nora to pull this together. But a lot of people, men included, don't realize just how stovepiped we are within our national organizations. And why this matters is I found that the knowledge gained over a career is literally that it's a career. It's not about coming into this field for a couple of years and moving on to another one. The depth of knowledge that is required, and I'm going to come back to, for the through life management of ammunition, in order for it to not have surprises and blow up because people didn't remember that there is stabilizer in propellant and it sat there for 30 years and nobody did anything. Those are hard lessons learned. The idea of the soft chivalry, I'd remind people that back in World War I and World War II, most of the bombs around the world were made by women in the factories. The women have always been there. They just haven't been recognized as being there. And I was just reading through some of the questions, and the issues I think that we're seeing are actually, I'll reframe them as society questions. What to do about proliferation of ammunition, well, that becomes a policing issue, a border control issue, and it means that there's something going on with power within that society that I think needs to be addressed, and those become political issues. So on the professional side, we can recommend ways. The IATGs, the International Ammunition Technical Guidelines, are an excellent place to start. The UN SaferGuard program is another excellent place to start. For developing the processes, the tools that need to be implemented to safeguard ammunition stockpiles to prevent proliferation. So I believe all the tools are there. We just need to work better at implementing them, and that support from the highest level politically is very important as an enabling function for all of us to get to what we want, which is a safe and secure society for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those inspiring remarks, Sherry. And I think really, I mean, you've really underpinned the reason why we have an open-ended working group on conventional ammunition, why we finally turned the international attention to this topic. This is a long-term issue. It's something that requires collaboration internationally, something that we need to break down stovepipes. And I think then we've demonstrated then that initiatives related to this global framework really have a lot of potential to challenge some of the issues you're mentioning, whether that has to do with gender, whether that has to do with power, safety, security, expertise more broadly. So I think there's a lot to think about for the international community on that one. So we could have very long conversations on this topic, but I'm aware that many of our delegates will shortly need to return to the negotiating room to keep discussing the global framework on conventional ammunition through life management. What I'd like to do now is just put a slide up that will show some of the resources that are available if you'd like to have more information on this topic that have been provided by many of the people that co-sponsor this webinar. So on the left there, we have our document on extracting evidence, which unpacks challenges in assessing the true costs of diverted ammunition. Then the next to that, we have our handbook on gender responsive small arms control, which is a practical guide to gender concepts and gender aspects of all aspects of small arms and light weapons control, including international instruments. The red covered book there and the one to its right are both specific gender and ammunition documents that were created by UNODA with support from the Small Arms Survey, and they explore the gender dimension of ammunition management throughout the life cycle. On the right there, we've got the Small Arms Survey's Unplanned Explosions at Munition Sites database, which includes all publicly available information of unplanned explosions at munition sites and how many casualties that resulted from that. The bottom right, the three publications there from UNODA. We have one on women managing weapons that touches upon many of the topics we've discussed in this webinar. So it provides an overview of the state of play of women in weapons and ammunition management, but also some good practices that can help overcome some challenges that women face in this field. Connecting the Dots talks about the linkages between the Women, Peace and Security agenda and small arms control agendas. That might be relevant to many in our audience here who are talking about the importance of complementary agendas. And on the bottom right there, we have a UNODA document that looks at, and I think we've got the email appearing on this screen there. We've got a UNODA document that talks about the gendered impacts of explosive weapons in populated areas. So that might be useful for member states wishing to better understand how women and men are affected differently by explosive weapons. On the left there, then the open-ended working group on conventional ammunition has actually become a wealth of resources. There's working papers on gender mainstreaming and ammunition through life management. That was the one created by Panama, UNODA and Small Arms Survey. There's one on security sector governance, principles for oversight and accountability that was put together by Costa Rica, Trinidad and Tobago and the Small Arms Survey. And then there's a dedicated objective on gender mainstreaming within the draft global framework itself. And finally, at the bottom there, we've got UN SaferGuard. So they are the ones who created the integrated ammunition technical guidelines, which are guidelines and accompanied with a knowledge platform on how to implement adequate ammunition management. So we're going to put these all on the event page if you want to access them, and we'll see if we can share the link with you shortly. So thank you very much for joining us. This has been a really fascinating conversation. And for closing remarks, I now have the pleasure to hand the floor to Hans Almerschlechner, who's the Deputy Permanent Representative of Austria to the United Nations. And we know that Austria has also been a very strong player in promoting provisions on women's meaningful participation in ammunition management. So the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Callum. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to be with you here today. I would like to thank the organizers for their commitment and the speakers for sharing their valuable insights as ammunition management experts on their experiences and lessons learned. We had an interesting discussion on the barriers for meaningful participation of female experts in ammunition management around the world. And we received useful suggestions on how to overcome such barriers going forward. I would like to thank the experts for the openness and clarity of their presentations, for their tireless personal commitment and energy, and for their solution-oriented approach. We heard impressive reports that confirm the importance of the 2022 UN ODA initiative to establish the Women Ammunition Management Network under the UN SaferGuard program to promote more diversity in this area, and thus to contribute to greater visibility, which of course should result in very concrete follow-up measures. Before closing, let me briefly touch on some of Austria's priorities and projects concerning ammunition safety and security in the context of international cooperation and assistance. Providing assistance and supporting requesting countries in a phase-wise and structured approach is one of the key Austrian endeavors with regards to small arms, light weapons, and stockpiles of conventional ammunition. Experts of the Austrian Armed Forces have been involved in different regions of the world for more than a decade. Currently, we are engaged in long-term projects in 8 countries in the Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, in the Middle East, as well as in Africa. Our experts have developed an arms and ammunition logistics program, which focuses on advice and training. It contains various modules, from 1-week awareness raising courses to long-term capacity development with different training courses, from basic to advanced, covering the whole spectrum of stockpile management and stockpile security. The main objective is the mitigation of risks for the civilian population, but also to minimize the possibility for illicit proliferation and environmental damage. In this context, we also see the importance of the gender lens. Strengthening gender mainstreaming, as well as the full, equal, meaningful, and effective participation of women is of particular concern and should be pursued with very concrete, practical measures in the future. This approach shows that for Austria, it is important in particular to look at the issue of ammunition logistics holistically, not breaking the subject down into individual topics. Arms control and disarmament aspects play just as much a role as human security, and the fight against illegal proliferation is just as much a factor as environmental hazards posed by improperly stored ammunition. In line with these priorities, it is a pleasure to inform you today about a current project that Austria has launched together with UN ODA. In autumn 2023, the first training course specifically tailored for participants of the UN Women Ammunition Management Experts Network will be piloted in Austria and will feature a gender-balanced trainer and instructor team. In addition to theoretical and practical training sessions, this 2-week event will also promote the exchange of experiences between the female experts and address special needs in this context of women's meaningful participation in ammunition management. We see this initiative as an essential and timely contribution in a highly topical field and are very much looking forward to a fruitful cooperation. Once again, thank you all for joining us for today's interesting and very timely side event. And we hope that some of the points raised will be brought up in this week's deliberations by the open-ended working group. And again, I thank you very much. I hand over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much. That's Hans Almerschlechner, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Austria to the UN. And we're very happy to hear that Austria is supporting this issue, both in the discussions on the global framework, but also, as Ambassador Maritza Chan said at the beginning, by listening, learning, and then acting to support the Women's Network of ammunition management experts. So once again, from me, thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. I hope it's been interesting for you. I'd like to once again thank our speakers today. So we had Lieutenant Colonel Preeti Kamwar from the Indian Army. We had Lina Castillo-Mendez from UNMAS Colombia. We had Sheena St. Mark from the Royal St. Lucia Police. And we had Sherry Oak from the Department of National Defence in Canada. Once again, also we'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the missions of Costa Rica and Austria, UNIDIR, UN SaferGuard, AMAT, GICHD. I'd also like to thank Lionel Kosternik, who's been helping us with the tech here at the Small Arms Survey site, and also like to thank the donors for the work on gender done by the Small Arms Survey, the German Federal Foreign Office, and the Switzerland's Peace and Human Rights Division in their Foreign Affairs Ministry. With that, I'd like to let all of our delegates go back to their important work at the open-ended working group, and I hope we get to meet again for another interesting discussion with some similar experts on this important topic in the future. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Callum.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been a wonderful experience for me with everybody here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and thank you for the network, and see you soon.